Laura, thank you so much for coming on to the Life on Purpose podcast to talk all things gut health. You know, the last few episodes, and I've been really trying to get people on here who can get practical information into people's hands as far as their own health and kind of like the empowerment thing, because I feel like there aren't a whole lot of answers for some of these more complicated or chronic issues. So I really, really appreciate that you're here and that you're willing to discuss this and kind of everything that you do and what kind of results that you've been able to see with people that you work with. So again, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah. So we are talking kind of gut brain health, gut health, all of that. So let me just start by kind of what you do and then jump into kind of your story and why you do it, how you got here.
Yeah. So I help women that struggle with IBS. So it's irritable bowel syndrome. And I specialize in the gut brain connection because of my own journey of recovering from an eating disorder. The whole route that I saw available for healing any gut issues was about eliminations and restrictions and all that kind of stuff. And when you've gone through recovery, you're not going to do that. Like you're like, I choose no, but I still want to be able to like feel good with what is happening in my gut. And so after going through my own thing, so I got diagnosed with depression when I was 13, same thing with IBS, and just for my whole life, never had a normal relationship with my body or with food or with my mind or any of that stuff because I just thought it was broken. And so I took out all my stress and all that kind of stuff. And I was just like, oh, well, this is just the way it is. And so I went on to study psychology and went that whole route. I was like, well, if this is my brain, I'm going to go learn about it. Let's see how this thing works. And then after losing, and like I had little nudges that my body wasn't functioning, right? Like the little like taps that we feel as we're going, but we write them off as like, oh, this is just normal. Like this is just, everyone feels this way, right?
It's funny not to break into your story here, but it's funny how we can talk ourselves out of what's really going on.
Exactly.
We're kind of trained to ignore these, like you said, these nudges, these cues, hello, something's happening here.
Exactly. It's one of those things where it's like these slight nudges. So now, being as far away from it as I am now, I can look back and be like, oh my goodness, that started like when I was a child, like colicky as a child, like all this stuff, all these things. I'm like, understand it now. But as I went through my life, and then I unexpectedly lost my mom my last year of university, and I went on through my coping mechanisms as a trauma response. So I ended up really abusing my body. I went to Asia where no one knew me and just got into a really toxic lifestyle. And so it was there where I hit my rock bottom, and I was like, I don't want to live this way anymore. But like, it was like, I felt like I didn't want to live anymore. Right. But it was, I realized it's just, I didn't want to live that way anymore, feeling like I didn't belong in this skin or in this body or always being sick. And I just didn't know. So then I went on to, again, make peace with another enemy and went down the route of studying nutrition, but really dove into it, like really got obsessed with it and was like, everything has to be perfect. Like I'm going to heal my gut. I'm finally going to take responsibility. And I realize now that that was my coping mechanism. Like that was something that I didn't have the depth that I do now to actually face what was going on, but I had the depth to start taking responsibility for my life. And so inch by inch, I started to do that and unraveling the other things. But what happened was we keep our emotions in our gut. We keep everything in our gut. And so even though I was quote unquote doing the healthy things and the right things, I was going so extreme. I was following all these rules. And because I had the eating disorder, I was, going keto, fasting, low FODMAP, all this kind of stuff. And it wasn't until my hair started falling out. I had lost my period for 5 years. My skin, I had this rash that took over my entire backside and then ultimately took over my face. And so I had to leave work because it was so painful. And I was working with children and we didn't exactly know what it was. And I didn't want them to catch it. Sure. And I was like, oh my God, like what is, and my anxiety, oh my goodness. And it was finally when I was sitting in my natural, because at the time I was studying this stuff, I had clients, I was working with them to get healthy. And I was like, what is wrong with me? Like, I don't really know. And I was getting my specialty in microbiome. I was sitting down with my naturopath and she was like, do you want to talk about how your depression is linked to your IBS? And I was like, what? Like I had known about the gut brain connection, but I just like never put the two and two together because my whole life I had studied psychology. I was attacking that from one
Mm.
spectrum. I had studied nutrition. I was attacking that from the other. I never thought to put the two and two together. And so from that, I was like, oh, there's like food isn't the issue here. Like me at that time, I had eliminated 13 different food groups. I was eating soups and smoothies. Like that was it, because I couldn't take in food anymore. I was 40 pounds underweight. Like it was just so bad.
Wow.
Yeah, it was one of those things. And then it was like, okay, so like the only catalyst in this is like me. Like I can only change this. And everything I'm seeing on the internet, every doctor, every nutritionist, every naturopath is like, eliminate this food, cut out this food. And I was like, I would love to, but I also have spent years of my life recovering. I don't really want to go backwards. And so from there, fell in love with this whole gut brain connection, and I don't take any medications now, don't have depression, anxiety, don't have IBS, none of that stuff, just from nurturing and understanding how this whole vessel as a unit works.
So what's really interesting, and you kind of touched on this a little bit about how you were looking at these things very separately. So the psychology of what was happening to you, and then the nutrition part, but you never put the two together as being connected. So kind of the emotions up here and the physical stuff down here. And I think in general, when we look at health as a whole and how we've approached it kind of in the modern age, is that we separate all of our systems and we look at everything very separately. And so, you kind of made this point of it's all connected. The anxiety and depression and stuff was all connected to your gut and vice versa. So then I guess my question is, what comes first? Is it a gut issue first, or is it the other way around?
That's the thing, right? It's like, is it the chicken or the egg? And it's
Exactly.
one of those things where like understanding how it works, right? So we're made up of trillions of bacteria. It controls everything about us. Majority of it is housed in our gut. And because it's housed, how many times have we been like, I have butterflies in my stomach, or like, I'm so anxious, like, or you get like the anxious poops before like a big presentation, or like a lot of my girlies are like before the grocery store. I don't know why that's the thing for people, but they get like grocery store poops, but it's one of those like
I can honestly say that's never happened to me.
I'm like, I don't get it, but okay, cool. But we have these things, and that is because we have 30 different neurotransmitters housed in our gut lining. So we do have to have certain nutrients to break that blood-brain barrier, but they're housed there. So we have 90% of our serotonin, we have 50% of our dopamine, we have GABA, norepinephrine. So everything that keeps us happy, calm, rewarded, focused is housed in our gut lining. And actually, majority of the communication goes through our gut to our brain through this whole thing called the vagus nervous system, and it gives off these action potentials. And so when we can understand that, right, if one isn't functioning, then how are they going to work together through this whole thing? And it's like, you can't just look, and that's what we do, right? We're like, oh, you have a chemical imbalance in your brain. This is how that works. But really, that is used far too often, because there's very slim people that have that, where usually we have unstable blood sugar levels, we have inflammation in our brain, because that is what anxiety and depression is. It's just inflammation in our brain. And that's corresponded in our gut health, that's corresponded in what's happening in this whole system. And so instead of looking at it as just like, oh, these two separate units are broken, it's like, no, they're just kind of asking for help. Like this is just a sign and a signal. And when we can answer that with permission and like space, we're able to actually work with them as a full unit, as opposed to how can we ignore both of them with like some quick fix separately?
Right. Or mask, kind of deal with the symptoms up here, maybe mental health drugs, etc. And we're going to mask that a little bit. Well, then your IBS doesn't go away. So then we're going to, mask that with some drugs. And then that really kind of doesn't resolve. And then you're kind of just masking both instead of really dealing with kind of the underlying issue. So 100%. What is the underlying issue, and why is it so prevalent? Like, what are we doing to our guts that are causing so many issues? Because it's not just IBS, right? You've got autoimmune issues. You've got all of these issues that stem from an unhealthy gut system. What is it, in your opinion, or in your expertise, however you want to approach this, that's happening?
Everything. Like everyone is like, oh, like live like the caveman. And it's like, we can't. We live in a modern society. That's just not possible. We take medications. if we need them for the time being, especially right now, people are getting the vaccines and doing that kind of stuff, which we need to survive and, go do. We eat in certain ways. We're in polluted environments because it's a modern world we live in. We are born into this world. That's already a traumatic experience based off of if you're going like through the birth canal or it's a C-section. Like there's just so many things. But at the root, it could be slow metabolic function. It could be gut-brain dysregulation. It could be low stomach acid. It could be medication use. It could be stress level. Like there is so much. And so we're so gung-ho on diets and medications being the solution.
Yeah.
Where it's just like, you're not looking at you're not looking at this thing as an entire unit. And when we're going the quick fix route, then you're only going to get a Band-Aid solution. You really can't expect to be getting back to feeling quote unquote normal because you're not taking the time. You don't even know what this signal, this messenger is trying to deliver to you because you're just trying to shut it down.
So the whole goal then is to start with the gut, correct? And start kind of that healing process. How is one supposed to do that? So I guess let's start with IBS. So, and correct me if I'm wrong, that's not something that I've ever had to deal with. I've had friends and clients who this is an issue for. But in my experience, it's always been kind of this blanket term. We don't really know specifically what's wrong. So we're just going to say irritable bowel syndrome. Is it nerves? Is it dysbiosis? What is IBS?
100%. It's all of those things. That's the problem is you go through. So there's that running joke of just like, at the end of IBS is BS. Yeah. Because that's what it is. You get to the end of it. And as long as, when it comes to matters of the gut, always test, do not guess, right? Because that is a thing you need. If you're going through, and I have a blog post on my website of like how to diagnose IBS, because you want to make sure that it's not an overflow of parasites. Like we all have parasites, we all have candida, we all have yeast, these things happen. But it's when the body isn't balanced that it'll start to show symptoms. But you want to make sure that it's not something like Crohn's or IBD or anything deeper than that. And then once you get to the end of it and they're like, we don't really know what's wrong with you. So here's this, go on low FODMAP, tape some Miralax. It's also all in your head. Here's an SSRI. Here you go. And you're like, no.
Not happening.
Yeah. And so it really is. And so at the root of IBS, this is why like with my clients and stuff, it's going through the whole spectrum. It's not focusing on eliminations. We're looking at, okay, so what are the foundations? Like, what is your foundations? How much are you eating? Are you eating enough? Usually no. Like when you're so afraid of food at that point, because you've done all this and you're in so much pain, you're probably not eating enough, right? Like I definitely wasn't.
Sure. Because it was so the discomfort from eating was causing you not to eat enough.
Exactly. It's called avoidant restrictive intake disorder and so food intake disorder. So you usually often see that with kids where they're like, oh, I don't like that texture. I don't like that color, like all that kind of stuff. They won't eat it in that way. As adults, what we have that's usually because it has nothing to do with weight anymore. It's what is the physical repercussion of what's going to happen to my body. And so it's this whole other spectrum of an eating disorder because it's not in the way you would see like anorexia or orthorexia or bulimia. I'm literally afraid of this food because of what it does to my body. And so that's what happens there. And so you have to pull that into consideration, right? Like you can't just be like, food is the issue. You have to unravel that with people to be like, actually, it's not. It is the way you're looking at that food. It's the stress. It's how this whole vagus nervous system is working and how when you actually get your stomach acid and metabolic function back up into balance, you can eat normally. But at the root is what used to be in our bellies, like the stomach acid used to be like car battery acid. It used to kill off pathogens. It was so strong. It was great.
Sure.
And then the modern world and stress and everything started to happen. So now it's basically like apple cider vinegar.
Something is happening to us over time with like we said before, kind of a toxic environment, stress. I mean, stress is, and I would say probably even over this past year, it's through the roof. I mean, insane amounts of stress. And then kind of what's being put on our food and how our food's being grown. And you've got this kind of breakdown where we don't really operate the way that we used to, which has been able to create kind of this chronic issue of chronic diseases, which again, like we said before, all starts in your gut. So how once you get through the mindset issues, once you get through kind of how you're looking at these things, how do you begin to then heal to where you get to a point where you're not afraid of it anymore? You're not having these physical reactions, because that's all people really want. They want to not have these physical feelings of discomfort and pain and the repercussions of what happens with IBS, as far as, you mentioned amenorrhea and all this other stuff. So how do you start making those physical changes?
Yeah. So I walk my clients through like the F.R.E.E method. So this is like where the R comes in, because you can reprogram the body, which is the coolest thing about the body. This is why you see, and this isn't like the woo-woo kind of stuff where it's just like, think of that, it will become. It's like, no, there's actual science behind it. And you can reprogram, just like say Pac-Man, right? Like Pac-Man comes in, he's eating the little bugs. That's what the good bacteria, once it's balanced again, can come back in and reprogram the bad bacteria. You don't have to wipe it out. You don't have to do these cleanses. You don't have to do these things to your body and flush everything out. Your body does that all on its own with its natural detoxification organs. So once you start to reprogram it, you can add in things like functional foods. And I'm not talking superfoods. I'm talking like liver and oysters and sardines and things your body needs, the vitamin A, vitamin K, vitamin E, like all these minerals that we're missing nowadays. We add them back in with real whole foods. And that's when you start to actually, your body in that state is like, ooh, I'm safe. Like I can heal. This is fine. And I can start to reprogram, and I can take in food. And that's when you start to explore it. And everyone is different. That's the thing, is you're going to have a reaction to food. It's fine, especially in this, living in America, like half the food you read the bag, you're like, what's N1?
I can't even pronounce these words.
Like, I don't even know what that is. And so sometimes you're going to get bloated. Like yesterday, I went out for like ice cream to this like new shop, and it was supposed to be like plant-based, whatever. I had it, my stomach after, I was like, oh, we're not happy with that. We're going to stick to dairy.
That was so good.
It's one of those things. And then you learn, and you give yourself permission to be like, oop, that one didn't work. And then you move on with your life. Like, it's not one of those things where you're like, I'm broken, I've gone backwards, I've done this whole thing. It's like, no, I know my body can bounce back after that, because I have the tools. I understand that I've gone through the processes to reprogram, get the stomach acid back up, get the metabolic function back in order. We can handle some bad foods sometime, just like going to an Indian restaurant, you're going to get bloated. That happens.
Well, and that's really interesting, and kind of across the board with autoimmunity and any other chronic disease that's related to kind of gut issues, is that not everybody is going to take the same path, because not everybody, there's no one way. And I like to tell my clients also is that we're going to experiment. We are going to figure out, you're going to try things that work. You're going to try things that are complete failures. But at least when you fail, you know that okay, that's not going to work. I'm going to take that out of the toolbox, and we're going to stick to these other things. And I think that's really important for people to understand, is that this is going to be a process. There's no easy fix, because you didn't get there overnight. Exactly. Obviously, just like what you mentioned, I mean, if you look back, it was from childhood. You've been kind of dealing with these things for years and years and years. So let's go backwards kind of to your story. What were some of the things that got you to this good place, to this place of where you said you had issues with amenorrhea? I mean, that's a huge signal that something's wrong. So I guess explain to everybody who doesn't know what amenorrhea is.
I didn't have a cycle for 5 years. 5 years. And so like at the time, I was 22, and I was like, oh, this is perfect. Like, I was like, I don't want that. And then as I started to get older, I was like, wait, I want children someday. And then it wasn't even that point, which is so, I look back at it and I just want to like hug my younger self. Cause I was like, oh, like that stuff didn't bother me. Like my hair was falling out. That didn't bother me. My mood swings didn't bother me. My bloating, whatever, I could wear a flowy dress, my missing period, that didn't bother me. It wasn't until the vanity aspect came and my skin started to do this funky thing, which now I'm looking at it and I'm like, Laura, like why? But like, that's what it took. Yeah. And as sad as that is these little kind of nudges, like we spoke about, is just, that's what ultimately gets you there. But it's not one size, right? Like it's not one thing that would shift this change. And if I just went on like a hormone balancing thing and that would fix it, or if I went like that kind of direction, it's like, no, it's all these different signs that were ultimately like, please listen to me. Like we're just trying to love you.
Kind of one thing after another. Skin issues, obvious hormone issues with the amenorrhea, and the issues with weight, not being able to gain weight. You said you were what, 40 pounds underweight?
40 pounds. Yeah.
Wow. And then, skin and hair, all of that. Yeah. Big flashing lights. Hey, something's going on. So what was it? What was it that, what was your process? How did you get to be where you are now, to where you have resolved, the majority of your issues, if not all? I'm not really sure. And then you're in a place to help other people.
Yeah. And honestly, it was a long path. It started out with going to therapy and getting help there. That was the first one, even though that was like the hardest one. But in that process, I realized I was not alone, that I was not unique, that I was not special in this arena, and I was the only one. No one would ever understand. That was where that came from. And then I started to build a team around that. And so I was in school. So I was learning this, I was learning all the theories. I had all the background, I had all the doctors, so I could reach out to them and stuff. But it was always a different approach because I was also recovering from an eating disorder. So it's like, this is very different, which is usually what you see in the health. Yeah, but you see it quite often in the health field, actually. It's like a lot of us are, once you know food, it's really hard to look at food normally. Like you look at it, you're like, I don't know, I can't do it. So I did that, started on therapy, started on the mindset stuff, started working with a nutritionist, a naturopath, and a functional doctor, doing that whole route, got a GI specialist, got that whole route. And even then it was just like, this isn't really working. And so I kept failing and doing because the inner mindset thing was just like, I knew, because then I got to the point as well from the eating disorder, I didn't want to put on weight. Like it was one of those things of like, I knew the last pillar, the last thing, it was like, I know I was eating quote unquote the right foods, I was doing the right thing, but at the same time, I was still trapped in that mindset of like, oh, I'm doing keto, or, oh, I'm fasting, or, oh, I'm doing low FODMAP. And like, these things were still like blanket statement stuff, right? Like, it was like, even though it was like gut healing healthy, it was like, not really. And so finally it was like sitting there and like sitting with my whole team of experts. And it was like, you still have a problem. Like address this and do that. And even though you're helping other people, you can't excel any further than that because you haven't healed that. And so I took a year or so just to kind of tune back in, rewire my brain, be okay with putting on the healthy weight because I want babies. And I was looking at the longer term picture, right?
Yeah, that's really interesting that you mentioned that, of kind of getting very attached to these ideas, kind of these diets and kind of this weight, because you got so used to being this certain size and being attached to that, these labels almost. So, and I always caution against that. And we've talked about it on this show before, of being attached to labels. So like people that I work with have Hashimoto's, Graves' disease, adrenal fatigue, that kind of stuff. And they get very attached to this label. This is what I am. This is what I have. And it's very hard to kind of detach from that. And so it's like that in just about anything, and getting attached to diets and eat, kind of like you mentioned, the low FODMAP. You can get very attached to this, even if it's not working, and have a hard time letting go of that and trying something else. Right.
100%. And that's the thing, right? Like that's your safety zone. Right. And you become this thing. And for me personally, I was running so I lived in Thailand at the time. I was in Bangkok. I was running workshops. I was doing this whole thing. I was traveling around doing this thing of just like known as like the gut queen, like knew all that stuff. And so like, I put myself into that box. I had to eat a certain way and look this certain way and have this. And it was like, you can never enjoy like an ice cream or a cocktail out because gut queens don't do that. And so you're in that box. And it's like, finally you sit there and you're like, wait a second. This isn't all that life is. Like health is important. Don't get me wrong, but health is just the catalyst to everything else. It shouldn't just be the main pillar, right? And being IBS and being this and all that kind of stuff. And so that took a while. Like that was the mindset, unraveling all that kind of stuff. and learning that, oh, my body actually can heal, like trusting in that and being like, okay, so if I'm focusing more instead of low, like restrictions, eliminations, what can I add in? So I started diving more into functional foods. I started to diving more into like just looking at like sardines and vitamins and minerals and the things I was missing, and cortisol levels, and how do I raise my stomach acid and metabolic function, as opposed to thinking food is the issue.
Yeah.
It was like, oh, it's not.
Well, and that brings me kind of to this industry that's popped up in the last few years of food sensitivity testing. And while I think that it can be a useful tool in some areas, what is your approach to food sensitivity testing in the gut brain arena, kind of what you do?
Yeah. So I did an entire like masterclass training thing in my Facebook group on how I think food sensitivity kits are trash.
Okay. Well, let's dive in. Like I said, I welcome all kinds of different opinions and approaches, and I'm not like married to anything here. So let's hear it. Lay it on me.
Yeah. So it's the home sensitivity kits. I think all they do is we all have IgG reaction. That is normal. That's a normal thing. When we eat food, our body is going to react. And this is why when you get your kits back, it's going to say all the recent foods you just ate.
It's going to have like 750 different reactions.
Exactly. Because you just ate those foods. That's in a healthy human. We all have that kind of reaction. And IgE is when we have an allergic reaction. So that's different. I do think this will be the future of gut healing, gut protocols, health protocols. I think microbiome tests are going to be the future. But also the thing is, if you take two different tests, you're going to get two different results. They're not consistent enough to be doing this right now, because it's such a new field of science. It's such a business right now too. Everything has probiotics on it. So they just like love this stuff. And so if you can actually get consistent results, you need to link arms with someone that knows what they're reading, not just be like, oh, red zone, da, 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 da. Like it's go and get the actual work done, because you're just going to get food anxiety, and you're going to see an avocado on there. Then you're going to freak out about the avocado. You're going to freak out about everything. And then your stress levels are raising, and that stress is doing way more damage.
Yeah. And then you've created this other issue, like you mentioned before, of just being like anxious around food, like thinking about it all the time and wondering, okay, if I put this in my body, am I going to have a reaction? When in reality, you are creating the reaction because you're shitless about, if I eat this, am I going to, feel like crap? But
exactly. I call it the food hangover. Like that's what it is. It's like you sit there and you're like thinking of the food, and like you eat the food and you're like, I shouldn't be eating the food. And then you move past it, and then you're still thinking of that food, and like you can't let go of it for like 3 days.
That is a terrible, terrible way to live.
But it happens so often. Like you're like thinking about it, and you're like, oh, I shouldn't have had that. Shouldn't have had that. Oh, I'm gonna get bloated
guilt around it.
Yeah. And then you're like, I'm gonna get bloated. And then you're like, see, and you're like, no, that's your stress.
Right. So, I mean, a big part of it is just the way that you're thinking about it and the way you're approaching it. Okay. So if anybody does want accurate kind of food sensitivity testing, what do you recommend there? Working with a practitioner that uses a lab? That's what we do. So I work with somebody as a coach that only uses a specific lab for their nothing kind of mail home kind of situation, nothing like that.
Yeah. So I just do self-analysis, track your food for a little bit, understand how are you feeling? How are your energy levels? What's your body doing? It could be up to 72 hours that you're having an antibody reaction. So if you're actually looking back and seeing the consistency over that, where everyone else is like, oh, I tracked for like the day and this is what I had for breakfast. And then you skip the whole weekend and you wonder what's happening. And you're like, no, like, what is this? How are your stress levels while you're eating? Are you drinking water after? Are you actually spacing out your meals? Are you one of those grazers throughout the day? Like, bring it back to that before we start shaming food.
So basics, bringing it back to the basics. So you don't use any testing whatsoever. Nope. Okay. Now, how about, so we did talk about kind of the microbiome kits. How do you feel about those? Like you said, that's a new technology, but those are kind of looking at like what bacteria you have, what bacteria maybe you're lacking in, what bacteria maybe you have too much of, what foods would feed the good bacteria, what maybe to reduce so that the bad bacteria aren't kind of going crazy, right? So that's kind of like the microbiome kits that are out there.
Yeah. So the thing
Thoughts
is,
on those?
I will never have my clients do something that would even give me anxiety. So I have done one of those. I sat there, I look at the bacteria and I'm like, Jesus, like one of those kind
It
of
freaks
things
you
where,
out more than anything.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
You like look at it and you're just like, okay. And so of course my clients will get them. They send them to me. I look over it. Okay.
Yeah.
This is how we can add these foods back into the diet you're already eating. I'm not trying to revamp everything. I'm just going to start plugging away at this thing.
Sure.
Again, too new of science. It's one of those things where I do think this is going to be, oh my God, like it gives me chills thinking about what the next 10 years is going to be like in this field. But since these have just come out,
so they're,
it's something where it's like you go between two different labs, different results.
Different.
Like and then you're sitting there and you're like, oh, like, is it this bacteria and is it this bacteria? And it's like,
so it's too confusing right now to be
exactly
definitive. So you are very back to the basics kind of with your clients. So elimination diets. Let's talk that, and let's talk low FODMAP, because low FODMAP is one of those that, like you said, people can get very married to and maybe don't end up being the best thing for you. So let's start with elimination diets. How do you incorporate those in? Is that something that you kind of start with your clients to see kind of what reactions?
No. So again, I take a different approach because anything I wouldn't do, I won't do with my clients. I personally don't restrict without reason. Okay. I'm not just going to, because someone says don't have gluten, just going to jump on that bandwagon. I'm not going to do that. I do think we do need dairy. Again, gluten is just gluten-free, and gluten options nowadays, they're both trash. Like they're not good options.
Yeah. There's some really garbage ones out there. Sure.
Yeah. And so it's just knowing where your food comes from. I stick to whole foods, all that kind of stuff. And then you start to play around. It's not, if my clients have SIBO or if they have something more serious, yes, we have to go through that process. That's just the way it is. But if it's IBS, it's not a food issue. So why would I create anxiety around food? I take out gut irritants, right? So I look more at, say, polyunsaturated fats. I look at more of the like cruciferous vegetable route. I look at those kind of things. How are you cooking your food? Are you really into those raw, big salad things? Well, it's probably not
raw food's harder to digest. Yeah,
exactly. So looking more of that route of how are you preparing your foods? How are you eating your foods? How are you doing things in that route? And then we can start to play around with, oh, let's look at your food journal. Oh, let's see what was consistent this week of what was causing that. Okay, we can go back through in that way and play around.
So it's kind of a puzzle, a little bit of a matrix of kind of trying to figure out each individual's habits, lifestyle, stress levels, all of that. So again, very much back to the basics.
Exactly. And like, I think as a job as a consultant, it's my job to teach people, right? It's one of those things of like, I do it for my one-on-one clients and all that kind of stuff. But what I do in my courses is I teach people how to do that themselves without it being so life consuming and so fearful and all that kind of stuff.
Right. And that's all I think, and this is kind of something that I preach big time on this show, is that it's empowering when you know how to take your health into your own hands, especially if you're seeing practitioners or you're seeing coaches or doctors or whoever. And it's all so incredibly confusing because everybody's telling you to do something different. When really, if you have the knowledge and you have the tools and you understand your body, you can then figure out for yourself what areas you need to work on, what areas are kind of out of place. And I think that education and kind of the workshops that you do and other practitioners do and other coaches do and et cetera is really important, because then it puts that power in the client's hands, right? And again, having a team around you is important, especially if you just kind of stuck on something and you can't really figure it out. Having that support is imperative. But it's also very empowering to be able to get to the bottom of this yourself too.
Exactly. And
once you have that education,
that goes beyond health, right?
Oh,
like when you're sick, right? Like when your body feels like it's fighting against you, it's hard to not feel like the little girl, right? Like you're sitting there and you're just like, someone help me open my jar, like do something for me. And like, you're stuck in that thing. And when you can sit there and maybe a doctor is going to call you frustrating from time to time, because trust me, they do that to me quite often, where I'm just like, I'm not taking that. What's
or
actually
a mystery
wrong with
case.
me?
I just don't know. Your blood work looks fine. You're great.
I don't understand. It must all be in your head. Here's an SSRI. And you're like, oh,
completely. I mean, that story has been told multiple times on this show.
Oh God, it's one of those things.
Yeah.
But then you sit there and you're like, no, I'm not taking that. Please tell me what's wrong with me. I'm
I'm
gonna
not
be the
crazy. I'm
investigator.
not depressed. Yes.
Exactly. But sitting in that in like an empowered stance of like knowing the next route, knowing, hey, have you checked my vitamin K levels? What about B12?
Yeah.
All this kind of stuff. Where are we at on that? They'll be like, oh.
What do you see? Okay, well then let me ask you this. What do you see as the breakdown in kind of the traditional approach, and then what is happening kind of in the more integrative, holistic approach? Because those two need to be married, especially with as much chronic issues as we have, gut issues, autoimmune issues, like all of these chronic things that are really kind of being brushed aside. Like, and again, I've told this story on the show before, is, my doctor told me I have autoimmune thyroid disease, but my thyroid levels are always they're always normal. Yet when I was first diagnosed, I felt like I was going crazy. My joints were on fire. My hair was falling out. I couldn't think. I couldn't remember words. All of these issues, but I was quote unquote fine. And so when I had a holistic doctor or a holistic practitioner diagnosed me with autoimmune disease and I brought it to my traditional physician, she said, "Oh, well, that's no big deal. We'll just wait until your thyroid burns out and you can be medicated for the rest of your life." And I remember thinking that is, I won't use the words that I use, but like it felt criminal to me. It felt insane to me, and it felt disempowering, and it felt like, wow, there has to be something better. There has to be another way where we can marry these two worlds to where we have all this great medicine, we have all this great medical practice, traditional medical practice, and we have all of this other great knowledge on health and food and kind of how all this works, and we're missing something. There's this huge gap, and it feels criminal to me. It does.
My jaw is on the desk right now that
Yeah.
was what they did. That is
Right.
bananas. That they're like, oh, we'll just wait until your thermostat of your body burns out to that.
It's kind of like, and I mean, if you even think about it, it's even been called like the second brain. So
yeah, that's the thing. It's like you're so I had the same thing. I had hyper then hypo, and just kept bouncing back between. And so it's one of those things, but also at the same time, usually when you go and get your thyroid checked, they're not giving you a full panel anyways. No. They're not, they're checking, oh, cool, you got T3,
TSH, and
it's like, you're like, but is it reuptaking? Did we check that? Are we taking it back in? And it's like, no, you didn't check that. And that's where the under thing lies. And so this is the thing, is we have to be our own advocates. We're so quick to outsource, so quick. Give me a pill. Sure. Yeah. Whatever. Like, it's a guy in a white coat. Sure. Yeah. We got this, like going that whole route. And then we sit there and it's like, oh, like I am the advocate for this. And whether, like, I know it's not everyone's job, but this is where you hire a team and you keep going. Oh, and so like, even if people choose to not work with me, I point them in a direction of, say, a functional doctor that I like, or point, and I'm like, absolutely, go, like, do what you got to do in this. It's covered by your insurance. Great. Go that route. Like that, whatever it is, don't stop fighting for your own health. That is the underlying thing. And to merge the two, it's wherever you're comfortable. I'm not like here to shift anyone's mindset. If you're comfortable with what the Western way and how that all good, I'm not there to shake up your little comfort blanket at all. It's for the people that are like, no, I'm not cool with that. Like, someone just told me I'm waiting for my thyroid to burn out. Like, I'm not okay with that. Like, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to go this other route. And so you have to be, and of course it's going to be more costly. And that's usually where it comes up, is people are like, oh, I don't want to pay. And I'm like, well, you're going to pay eventually. Like
in the end, on the back end, when you've got chronic issues when you're 80, and they're way more detrimental with age and everything else, or they've compacted. And I think that's another thing people need to understand. They will just compact.
Yes.
Issues are just going
to started with IBS and depression.
Yes.
Here's hypothyroid. Here's amenorrhea. Exactly. I'm like, here we go.
Yeah.
There's all this stuff. It'll get on top of each other until one day it's like, oh, you can't have children, or you can't, like, here you go. Like it's, I don't know what's happening anymore. Or like, I'm going into psychosis because my whole body is so out of whack. Like, there's so many studies on that, right? Where it's just like, you weren't listening to the small knocks. And so you have to be preventative. You can't just be in response mode and making the excuse of, I don't have time, I don't have money, I don't have this. We all do. Majority of us do. We can all make time for our health, even if we can't afford this certain arena. There's free masterclasses everywhere. There's different areas where you can start to take responsibility
Right.
at whatever area you're at.
And that's the entire purpose of me starting this podcast, because I feel like, and I remember when I was sick, I had no idea that there was all of this other information that is not mainstream enough for me. And it's not mainstream enough for a lot of people. There, you have no idea how much there's a wealth of information out there on a lot of these chronic issues that's free for you to read. You just have to be able to incorporate them into your life somehow, if you can't afford to work with somebody. But you're right. So I know we're on a time crunch here, but I want to wrap up by, I would love to hear kind of one big success story of, a client that you've worked with that just felt like, oh my gosh, this was such a great turnaround, even if it's your own. And then kind of what you're doing with your masterclasses and where we can find you, and anybody who wants information on the gut brain connection and gut health and IBS and all of that fun stuff.
Yeah. So the thing I love is when people like come into my little orbit and they actually start to believe they can heal. Like that is the coolest part. It's the community aspect,
Right.
because when you're in the vibration of people being like, oh, I've healed, I've done this, I've done that. And you're like, oh, wait, that's possible. I can do that. Like, that's awesome. Like I have one client, Suzanne, she was on medications for her entire life, from hormonal issues, from depression to anxiety to just like all this kind of stuff going on. And so she came in and she was like, yeah, like I've had this forever, but like, why not try something new? Like, I don't know. I'm not.
What is there to lose?
Yeah. Like, I don't really know. And so we go through I worked with her for, usually my programs are 8 weeks. Mm-hmm. I ended up working with her for 6 months, going through the cycle. Cause she's like, no, there's more, like getting the little like inches. And by the end of it, no longer on medications, no medications that she had been on. She was 60, that she had been on for her whole life. And so she's like, has all this energy. She was an interpreter. So she was traveling all over the world when we could and doing all this kind of stuff. And it's so funny because then her husband, as they're traveling, he's like, why does my wife have all this energy? What did you do to her? And so then he started to work with me because he's like,
he's like, hey, I need some of this.
Exactly. Actually, he like still sends me like photos of their travels now. He's like, look at us. I have one on my phone now. I'm like, what's that? Like, you guys are the cutest. Like that's a thing though. Like now they're able to go travel and have this freedom and move about and not have to worry about, I don't have energy. I can't do it. My body's not keeping up with me. It's like, look at what we're doing in Nice today. And it's like,
and I think you forget, we have a tendency to forget how good we can feel.
Yes.
Right.
Yes. I always like used to say is like, you don't know how good it feels when bleep is all you have felt. Like it's like you don't know.
Exactly. Oh my gosh. Oh, that is, and again, that lends to kind of what we were saying before, is that empowerment issue of like, once you start to feel good, you're like, oh my gosh, okay, what else can I do? Let's do this, and it gives you that little boost to kind of keep going. So that's fantastic. So let's go ahead. Tell me what you have going on, masterclasses, anything, where people can find you, and all of the information on, you have F.R.E.E. Is that part of your program? The free program?
Yeah. So FRE is it's Foundations Reprogram. Yes, exactly. Yes. So Foundations Reprogram, Explore, Evolve. Okay. And so we go through the 4 steps. Gotcha. And that's what I cover in my Gut Recharge program, which is a 4-week program. Right now, we actually start today. That's what I have to jump into and do is our live welcome call with everyone. And that's a little 4-week online live coaching program that we do. For now, it'll be live. I just love like the sisterhood vibes and healing. Right. And you're like, oh, like I miss it. Everything is so automated nowadays. And it's like, no, like I want to connect to people. Yeah. So I have that. And then I have my one-on-one coaching. I do master classes like no one's business because I just love them so much. But whenever this goes live, just go over to my Instagram. It's Laura Martin Healing to Happy, or Laura Martin H_H2H. And you can go through my bio. It'll give you literally step 1, step 2, step 3, and let you know.
And that's Healing to Happy, right? That's your
Healing to Happy. Yes, that's my company.
All right.
Yes.
Perfect. Yes. Okay, great.
But I'm most active on Instagram. So just come say hello.
Okay, awesome. Well, those will all be in the show notes. The link to your website and all of your masterclasses and all of that fun stuff will be in there too. So Laura, thank you again so much. I hope everybody gets as much out of this as I did. And this will probably be out in a couple weeks.
Amazing.
So,
all right. Well, thank you so much. Thank you.
Thanks.